Hi guys, it's Mrs. Blanchard here with another snow day video. I'm hoping if we can do a few of these videos, you can watch them at home, we can move through this information rather quickly this week and do a few more activities in class. So let's talk about foreign diplomacy. We talked yesterday, or I talked in the previous video about the more introduction to the era of good feelings. So here you have this era of good feelings, and our political leaders are coming together to create a nationalistic feeling in the United States. So here is the movement of the American population from 1810 to 1820. Remember from 1800 to 1810 I had said the American population had increased in size, had nearly doubled, and the same is going to be true moving through U.S. history up until at least the Civil War. Not necessarily always doubling in size, but definitely increasing very rapidly. And so you see this movement into, if you look down in the South, into Alabama, and this is something in the 1820s that's going to be exacerbated in something called Alabama fever, and a continued trans-Appalachian migration really throughout the entire United States. So that means that we are coming more in contact with peoples in the West, whether that be the Canadians, the Russians, Mexicans, or those pesky Native Americans that seem to be lurking around every corner. So we're going to sign a series of treaties with Britain, with Spain, with Russia, and we'll talk about them more in depth. But overall, the spirit of era of good feelings is going to bring President James Monroe and to Secretary of State John Quincy Adams together to develop a strong nationalistic foreign policy agenda, things that help solidify and define the United States in terms of our nation's principles, but also in our tangible borders. So let's start out with the Rush-Bagot Treaty. Remember, this is on the end of the War of 1812, and during the War of 1812 there had actually been a battle of Lake Erie, and this is a picture, a painting from that battle. And so to prevent any future conflicts from happening along the Great Lakes, this dotted line you see going through the Great Lakes is created by the Rush-Bagot Treaty. To avoid conflicts along the Great Lakes, the United States agrees not to invade Canada again, and Britain agrees not to invade the United States again, and so we demilitarize the Great Lakes and demilitarize that northern border. Following the next year is the Convention of 1818. So the northern border along the Great Lakes is set, and this is going to become the basis of our modern border with Canada. Next, our attention really turns to Spanish Florida. The Spanish had been intimidated for two reasons during the War of 1812. First, Andrew Jackson took it upon himself to end the Indian attacks on Georgia from Spanish Florida in a series of wars called the Seminole Wars down in northern Florida, southern Alabama, Mississippi, and even southern Georgia. These are the Seminole Indians that had fled to Florida and separated off from the Creek tribes, which are one of the 5 civilized tribes in the South. These wars earn Andrew Jackson the name Sharp Knife for the brutality he displays against Native Americans. Jackson's military advances and the United States' success in the War of 1812 also kind of scare Florida, and they're fearful of American continued expansion. So Florida signs the Adams-Onis Treaty. Spanish assume that Florida would eventually be annexed by the United States anyway, so they're hoping to trying to appease the United States as well as create a strong diplomatically recognized border with the Americans. The U.S. also agreed to pay Spain $5 million and renounced all claims to Texas, though I want that to be a little bit of foreshadowing for you and thinking about in the 1840s the eruption of the Mexican-American War over our annexation of Texas. So the Adams-Onis Treaty is going to annex Florida, so that's now going to become a territory of the United States, which we saw in the map the other day on the election of 1820, and also set this red line here. It's a stepping stone border following the Sabine River to the Red River to the Arkansas River, and then following the line of the 42 parallel across. We started off the year talking about the Viceroyalty of New Spain, which is the administrative district of the Spanish here in Mexico. And so this is supposed to be an insurance policy by the Spanish that the United States will not try and annex anything south of this red line and setting up a strong border supposedly with the United States. It still, though, leaves into somewhat dispute the occupation of this Oregon country, which is going to be solved in the Convention of 1824 by removing Russian claims and settling the boundary of this Oregon country at 5440. And so this Oregon country is going to be claimed jointly by the United States and Great Britain. I know the map says and Russia, but that claim is removed after the Convention of 1824. The last thing, and we're going to read this more in depth in class, is going to be the Monroe Doctrine. This is like a rallying cry for American nationalism. We've seen rebellions like the Haitian slave revolt in Haiti, and there's going to be continued Latin American revolutions against especially the Spanish. And the U.S. feels a philosophical need to help support these revolutions. A lot of them use the American Declaration of Independence as their justification. But the European powers disliked these liberal rebellions and are tempted to try and reconquer them. So the Monroe Doctrine is the United States' attempt to warn European nations to stay out of the Western Hemisphere. We're going to say that the Western Hemisphere, our hemisphere, has a different political and historical tradition from the Eastern Hemisphere. The Eastern Hemisphere have always been the colonizers, where the Western Hemisphere has been the colonized. And so we attempt to draw this line through the oceans, saying that the United States will not interfere in Europe if Europe does not interfere in the Western Hemisphere. This is pretty much an empty threat for the next 85 to 90 years, but European powers do somewhat at least abide by it, mainly because of a series of different political things needing their attention more in Europe than in the United States. The United States claims it will protect Latin American independence, but the U.S. will act independently and protect its own sphere of influence. So this is really, our support of the Latin American revolutions is only secondary to our own desire to exert our power in the Western Hemisphere. On the eve of World War I, this Great Wall is supposed to be like a protective shield as Europe is going up in flames, embroiled in war, and it's keeping the United States, for the time being at least, peaceful and out of harm's way. So that was our flying dash through the borders and European or American nationalism, and we'll be looking at more in class this week.